Some journeys do not begin with the excitement of leaving. They begin with the quiet relief of finally finding a place where no one expects you to hurry. Hidden beyond the familiar halls of the library, there is a station unlike any ever built. No engines rush through its platforms. No clocks announce departures. Travelers arrive only when their hearts have carried enough. And every train waits with endless patience until they are truly ready to continue. Tonight, Elias follows a gentle invitation toward ***, the station for sleeping travelers, ***, where softly glowing platforms welcome weary souls. Peaceful sleeping carriages cradle dreams beneath the stars, and every quiet arrival reminds him that rest is never a pause from life's journey. It is part of the journey itself. Welcome once again to *** Sleep with Stories ***, where every gentle adventure is lovingly created to quiet the mind, soften the heart, and guide you toward peaceful sleep. So make yourself comfortable. Allow your breathing to become slow and easy. Let the worries of today grow lighter with every passing moment. And when you're ready, we'll quietly step together onto a platform where no traveler is ever late, because every meaningful journey begins exactly when the heart is ready. The archway stood open exactly as the elder librarian had promised. No lock guarded it. No guardian waited to ask permission. No ancient inscription demanded a test of wisdom before allowing another step forward. The doorway simply rested beneath the quiet moonlight, patient enough to welcome every traveler who arrived with an unhurried heart. Elias paused beneath its curved stone frame, allowing himself one last glance behind. Far across the peaceful rooftops of the hidden library, warm lanterns still glowed inside familiar windows. The great reading halls rested beneath their towering shelves. The conservatories shimmered softly beneath silver glass. The distant pavilion where fireflies gathered could barely be seen beyond quiet gardens, where tiny lights continued drifting peacefully through the summer night, just as they always would. Somewhere beyond those gardens, hidden beneath ancient branches, the wishing tree continued collecting hopes that belonged to strangers. None of those places had disappeared. They remained exactly where they belonged. Only Elias had changed. He smiled quietly, feeling no sadness at leaving them behind. The hidden library had gently taught him that beautiful places never ask to be carried. They simply become part of the traveler who once walked there. Beside him, Mira rested one hand lightly upon the strap of her satchel, her calm hazel eyes lingering upon the moonlit rooftops. "They never truly become distant," she said softly. Elias looked toward her. The places, Mira nodded, the parts of yourself that awakened inside them. For a quiet moment, neither of them spoke. Lumen slowly stepped closer to the edge of the archway, gazing curiously into the silver mist waiting beyond. I wonder, he whispered, who is waiting there tonight? His voice carried no excitement, only gentle curiosity, the kind that belonged to travelers who no longer hurried toward answers. The blossom lantern hanging at Elias' side answered with its own quiet glow. One tiny blossom inside the lantern slowly opened another petal before settling peacefully once more. The warm golden light reflected across the polished stone floor. Not brighter, only steadier, as though even the lantern understood this journey would ask for a different kind of light. Beyond the archway, the silver mist shifted almost imperceptibly. Somewhere far ahead, very faintly, a distant bell sounded once, not loud enough to summon anyone, not sharp enough to interrupt the silence. Only a single peaceful note, carried gently across the moonlit air before fading once more into stillness. Elias listened until even the memory of the sound became quiet. Then, together, the three companions stepped through the archway. Behind them, the warm golden doors of the hidden library remained open. Ahead, the moonlit path slowly descended through silver grasses toward a place no ordinary map had ever drawn, a place where weary travelers were never asked where they had come from, only whether they wished to rest before continuing. And somewhere beyond the drifting mist, soft lanterns had already begun waiting. The silver path descended so gently that none of the travelers could have said exactly when the great doors of the hidden library disappeared behind them. There had been no sudden turn, no towering walls, no hidden passage concealed beneath roots or stone. The world had simply become quieter. Each step carried them a little farther into a silence that felt wonderfully alive. Moonlight rested across the winding path like pale silk, revealing smooth white stones that seemed less arranged than patiently discovered by generations of travelers before them. No footprints remained upon them. Every journey left the path exactly as peaceful as it had been found. A cool breeze wandered lazily through the tall silver grasses. Instead of rustling sharply, the delicate blades brushed together with a sound almost like distant pages being turned inside an enormous library. Lumen smiled to himself. It sounds, he searched for the right words, as though someone is reading very slowly. Mira looked toward the silver meadow surrounding them. Perhaps someone is. Lumen blinked. Out here, She nodded gently. The library has never believed that stories live only inside books. The thought lingered pleasantly in the night air. Elias found himself slowing without realizing he had done so. There was no effort in it, no decision. His footsteps simply became quieter. The blossom lantern hanging beside him responded with a warm golden pulse. Inside its glass walls, the blossoms no longer shimmered with the lively glow they had carried upon the bridge of blooming lanterns. Instead, their light had become softer, steadier, almost sleepy, as though the lantern itself understood where they were going. The path continued winding between gentle hills. Clusters of tiny white flowers grew naturally among the grasses, opening only beneath the moon. Each blossom reflected faint silver light upward, making the earth appear as though countless tiny stars had quietly settled beneath every step. Lumen knelt for a closer look. "They are beautiful." He reached out instinctively before his fingers touched the nearest flower. It slowly folded its petals together, not from fear, not to hide, simply to continue sleeping. Lumen quietly withdrew his hand. "I think," he whispered, "they are dreaming." Mira smiled, and dreams deserve gentle company. Together they remained still until, after a quiet moment, the tiny flower slowly opened once more. Its silver glow returned exactly as before. Nothing had been disturbed. Nothing had been interrupted. Elias watched the small moment with quiet gratitude. There had once been a time when he might have mistaken stillness for emptiness. Now he recognized something entirely different. Life did not always reveal itself through movement. Sometimes its deepest expressions appeared through peaceful rest. Far ahead, somewhere beyond the rolling hills, another soft bell drifted across the moonlit landscape. One gentle note, then silence again. It sounded neither near nor far, only patient, as though the station already knew they were coming and saw no reason to hurry their arrival. The companions continued onward. No one suggested walking faster. No one wondered how much farther remained. For perhaps the first time since beginning their journeys through the hidden library, the distance itself no longer seemed important. The path had quietly become part of the destination, and every unhurried step already felt like arriving. The winding silver path gradually widened as it crossed the crest of another gentle hill. Beyond it, the landscape quietly unfolded into something Elias had never imagined. A broad valley stretched peacefully beneath the moon, wrapped in drifting silver mist that rose and settled with the slow rhythm of sleeping breath. air itself seemed softer here, cooler, filled with the comforting fragrance of cedar wood, rain-washed stone, and distant wild lavender carried upon the night breeze. Far below, warm lanterns shimmered like scattered constellations resting upon the earth. Not dozens, not hundreds, but countless gentle lights. Some glowed beside quiet wooden platforms. Others rested beneath elegant canopies. Many drifted lazily along narrow walkways that disappeared into the silver mist before quietly returning once again. Nothing about the valley suggested urgency. Nothing hurried toward tomorrow. Everything simply waited, patiently, lovingly, as though every traveler who had ever arrived here deserved as much time as their heart required. Lumen stopped walking altogether. His wide eyes reflected the distant lanterns below. He whispered almost inaudibly, doesn't feel like a station. Elias nodded slowly. No, it feels. He searched gently for words that seemed worthy of what lay before them, like someone built a place where tired journeys could finally exhale. Mira smiled. I think that is exactly what someone did. For several quiet moments, none of them moved. The valley itself seemed content to introduce itself without asking for admiration. Its beauty never insisted upon being noticed. It simply remained calm, certain, kind. The blossom lantern hanging beside Elias brightened ever so slightly. Inside, another blossom unfolded, not fully, only enough for a few delicate golden petals to release themselves into the lantern's gentle light before settling once again. The petals never escaped the glass. They merely drifted peacefully inside, circling like tiny sleeping stars. Elias watched them with quiet wonder. It always knows, he murmured. Mira looked toward the lantern. It doesn't know where to lead. It remembers when to welcome. Those words lingered softly between them. Below, the valley continued glowing beneath the great crescent moon. At its center, partially hidden within drifting mist, stood a magnificent building unlike any Elias had ever seen. Its architecture seemed to belong to no single age. Ancient stone arches supported graceful wooden roofs. Tall lantern towers rose beside glass observatories. Flowering vines climbed polished pillars without hiding them. Long platforms curved gently through peaceful gardens instead of cutting across them. There were no harsh edges, no smoke, no noise, only warm windows, quiet lanterns, and the comforting certainty that somewhere within those peaceful halls, someone had already prepared a place to rest for every traveler who had not yet arrived. Without another word, the three companions quietly began descending the moonlit path toward the station for sleeping travelers, not because they wished to reach it quickly, but because somehow it already felt like home. The path continued descending until the last gentle hill slowly slipped behind them. With each quiet step, the station revealed another small piece of itself. A wooden footbridge crossed a narrow stream so clear that every moonbeam resting upon its surface seemed perfectly undisturbed. The water made almost no sound. It simply wandered beneath the bridge, as though it, too, had nowhere it needed to be. Elias paused in the middle of the bridge. The stream reflected the great crescent moon above with such perfect stillness that he could no longer tell where the sky ended and the water began. Tiny silver fish drifted beneath the reflection, moving so slowly that they resembled floating leaves more than living creatures. Lumen leaned gently upon the smooth cedar railing. They don't seem afraid of us. Mirror rested her fingertips lightly upon the polished wood. Nothing here expects to be chased. For a little while, they simply watched the quiet water. The longer Elias remained still, the more details slowly appeared. Small white lilies rested along the banks. Dragonflies slept beneath broad green leaves. A family of tiny field mice carried grains through the tall grass without the slightest hurry. Even the breeze seemed to pause now and then, as though listening to the silence before continuing onward. Across the stream stood a weathered wooden sign. Its lettering had been carved by careful hands many years before. No bright paint decorated its surface, only smooth cedar polished gently by countless passing seasons. It read, "Every traveler arrives carrying more than a satchel. Leave only when your heart feels lighter." Elias quietly read the words a second time, not because they were difficult to understand, but because they somehow seemed to understand him first. Without thinking, he adjusted the strap of his satchel upon his shoulder. It suddenly felt much lighter than it had earlier that evening, not because anything had been removed, but because he no longer measured its weight by the things it carried, only by the journey it quietly accompanied. The blossom lantern answered with another soft golden pulse. Inside the lantern, one blossom slowly released a single glowing petal. The petal drifted upward, circled once around the lantern's glass, then quietly settled again among the others. Nothing was hurried. Nothing was lost. Everything simply found its own peaceful place. Ahead, warm lanterns continued glowing beneath graceful station roofs. For the first time, Elias noticed gentle movement among them. Travelers, some sat together upon wooden benches wrapped in soft blankets. Others quietly shared warm cups of tea beneath hanging lanterns. elderly couple smiled as they watched the moon above the platforms. A mother gently rocked a sleeping child, while someone nearby quietly tuned a small violin without yet playing it. No one appeared impatient. No one searched for departure boards. No one asked what time the next journey would begin. It seemed everyone already trusted that when the moment came, their path would quietly find them. Elias felt a peaceful smile appear almost without noticing. This place, he whispered, already knows how to welcome people before saying a single word. None of them hurried the final steps toward the softly glowing station. Some places invited travelers to arrive. This place allowed them to slowly become ready before they ever reached its doors. The first platform welcomed them without a single announcement. No whistles echoed across the night. No great clock counted passing minutes. No conductor hurried waiting passengers toward unseen destinations. Only the warm glow of lanterns rested peacefully beneath graceful wooden beams, filling the station with the quiet certainty that every traveler already possessed enough time. As Elias stepped onto the polished cedar platform, he noticed something extraordinary. There were no tracks, at least none that remained in one place. Silver rails shimmered gently beneath the lantern light before slowly fading into soft mist, only to quietly appear again farther ahead. They resembled moonlight more than iron, pathways more than railways. Lumens stared in amazement. "They are changing." Mira nodded softly. "They always do." He looked at her curiously. How can a train arrive if the tracks never stay still? She smiled. The station has never asked trains to follow tracks. It simply helps every traveler find the path already waiting for them. Lumen considered the answer carefully. Then, instead of asking another question, he simply accepted it. Some places within the hidden library were understood more deeply by listening than by explaining. The station itself seemed to breathe with peaceful life. A porter carefully folded blankets upon an empty wooden bench, preparing them long before anyone might need them. Nearby, an elderly woman quietly poured steaming tea into waiting cups that no one had yet claimed. Fresh bread cooled upon a nearby windowsill. Several lanterns had already been lit along an empty platform where not a single traveler presently stood. Everything had been lovingly prepared before necessity arrived. Elias felt a familiar warmth settle quietly within his heart. Rowan's lanterns, Elian's morning meadow, the wishing tree, every destination he had visited had shared the same quiet truth. Kindness was always prepared before it was requested. Perhaps that had always been the hidden library's oldest tradition. The blossom lantern hanging beside him glowed with quiet approval. One blossom slowly unfolded completely for the very first time since leaving the pavilion. Its golden light remained soft, never dazzling, only quietly alive, almost as though it recognized this place. Ahead, beyond several peaceful platforms, a beautifully crafted wooden station building rested beneath flowering climbing roses and silver ivy. Its broad windows glowed warmly against the moonlit night. Above the entrance hung a simple hand-carved sign. Its letters shimmered gently beneath the lantern light. The station for sleeping travelers. For a long moment, none of the three companions moved. They simply stood together beneath the moon, quietly taking in the peaceful station that seemed less like a place people visited and more like a place that had patiently been waiting to welcome them all along. Then, somewhere deep within the station, a single bell chimed, softly, warmly, not announcing an arrival, not announcing a departure, only quietly whispering, "Welcome home." The bell's gentle welcome faded into silence, yet somehow the silence that remained felt warmer than the sound itself. A tall wooden door slowly opened near the center of the station building. No one had pulled it. No hand appeared upon its polished brass handle. It simply opened, as though the station had quietly recognized three familiar travelers returning from a long journey. Warm amber light spilled softly across the platform. It carried with it the comforting fragrance of cedar wood, fresh bread, lavender tea, and the faint sweetness of vanilla drifting from somewhere deeper inside. Elias closed his eyes for only a moment. The warmth felt strangely familiar, not because he had stood here before, but because every place that had truly welcomed him had carried this same quiet feeling. No expectations, no questions, only gentle acceptance. Inside, the great waiting hall stretched peacefully beneath a ceiling of polished oak beams. Comfortable armchairs circled slow-burning fireplaces. Books rested upon small wooden tables beside steaming cups that had not yet grown cold. Soft blankets had already been folded neatly across nearby chairs. Everything seemed prepared, not for important guests, but simply for tired hearts. Several travelers rested peacefully throughout the hall. One elderly man slept comfortably, with an unfinished book still resting upon his lap. A young woman quietly embroidered tiny silver stars into a travel cloak while smiling to herself. Near one broad window, two children watched glowing moths drift lazily beneath the moon without speaking a single word. No one looked surprised as Elias, Mira, and Lumen entered. Instead, they smiled with the quiet familiarity reserved for those who had always belonged. An elderly station keeper slowly rose from behind a beautifully carved reception desk. His silver hair rested neatly beneath a simple navy cap. A long charcoal blue coat hung comfortably from his shoulders, its cuffs embroidered with tiny silver stars, almost hidden within the fabric. Kind eyes met Elias, not curious, not questioning, simply welcoming. He inclined his head ever so gently. "We've been keeping the fire warm. Nothing more. No introductions. No explanations. Only those 6 peaceful words." Elias found himself smiling before he realized he had done so. For the first time since leaving the hidden library, he understood something quietly wonderful. This station was not separate from the library. It was another room within the same endless kindness, only built for travelers whose hearts needed somewhere gentle to rest before discovering the courage to continue. Outside, the great crescent moon continued watching peacefully over the sleeping platforms, and somewhere beyond the station roofs, another unseen journey had already begun waiting with infinite patience. Morning had not yet arrived, yet neither was it still night. The station seemed to exist within a quiet hour that belonged to neither yesterday nor tomorrow. The fireplaces continued glowing softly. Lanterns rested beneath carved wooden beams without growing dim. Outside the tall windows, silver mist wandered peacefully between the empty platforms, rising and falling like slow breathing. Nothing hurried the coming dawn. The station simply allowed the world to awaken whenever it was ready. The elderly station keeper gently motioned toward a broad circular room adjoining the great waiting hall. "If you've traveled far," he said warmly, "every journey deserves a first cup before its first question." His voice carried the same comforting certainty as a favorite blanket placed across tired shoulders. No one felt obliged to answer immediately. Instead, Elias, Mira, and Lumen quietly followed him through an arched cedar doorway. The room beyond felt wonderfully alive. A great kettle rested above a slow-burning fire, whose flames glowed pale gold instead of orange. Shelves curved gently around the circular walls, filled not with books, but with beautifully crafted wooden tea caddies. Each carried a tiny handwritten label, asterisk asterisk for long roads, asterisk asterisk, asterisk asterisk for quiet evenings, asterisk asterisk, asterisk asterisk for happy reunions, asterisk asterisk, asterisk asterisk for gentle courage, asterisk asterisk, asterisk asterisk for homesickness, asterisk asterisk, asterisk asterisk for new beginnings, Lumen wandered slowly along the shelves, reading each label with growing curiosity. They are named after feelings. The station keeper smiled. They are prepared for them. Elias paused before one simple cedar box. Its label read only for travelers who have forgotten they are tired. His fingers rested lightly upon its smooth lid. Something about those quiet words settled gently inside him. He had never considered that a person could forget such a thing. Perhaps weariness sometimes arrived so gradually that the heart simply accepted it as ordinary. The station keeper noticed his thoughtful expression. It surprises many travelers. He carefully lifted the small cedar box and measured a handful of fragrant leaves into a waiting teapot. The longest journeys rarely make people feel tired all at once. They simply ask for one more step, and then another, until rest begins feeling unfamiliar. Warm water flowed slowly over the leaves. Almost immediately, the room filled with the comforting fragrance of wild honey, cedar blossoms, soft chamomile, and something Elias could not quite name, not because he had never smelled it before, but because it reminded him of many peaceful memories at once. The elder librarian's reading room, Leora's evening tea, Ferris laughing beneath flowering branches, the meadow where starlight rested. Each memory arrived quietly, then settled beside the others without asking to become more important. Mira accepted her cup with both hands. The station remembers. The keeper inclined his head. No, it simply creates enough stillness for travelers to remember themselves. No one spoke after that. The tea required no conversation. Its warmth slowly spread through tired hands, quiet shoulders, and hearts that had traveled farther than they had realized. Outside the window, one distant platform lantern quietly brightened, not because anyone had arrived, but because somewhere, someone had finally begun to rest. The first cup of tea disappeared so quietly that none of them remembered taking the final sip. Only the comforting warmth remained. The station keeper carefully rinsed the teapot before placing it back upon its wooden shelf with the same gentle attention one might offer an old friend. There is one tradition, he said softly, we ask every traveler to observe before they choose where to rest. Lumen looked up with quiet curiosity. A tradition. The keeper smiled. Not a rule, a reminder. He walked toward one of the tall windows overlooking the peaceful platforms. Outside, silver mist continued drifting between rows of warm lanterns. Several travelers sat quietly upon benches wrapped in blankets. One elderly woman knitted beneath a hanging lantern. A young musician rested with his violin beside him, his eyes peacefully closed. Farther along the platform, a family quietly watched glowing moths dancing above flower beds without speaking a single word. The keeper rested one hand upon the cedar windowsill. Notice something. The three companions looked carefully across the station. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Everything remained wonderfully peaceful. Then Elias slowly realized what the keeper meant. No one appeared to be waiting. Not impatiently, not anxiously, not even expectantly. Travelers simply rested wherever they happened to be. Some read, some slept, some quietly watched the moon. Others smiled gently at complete strangers before returning to their own peaceful thoughts. No eyes searched the horizon. No one repeatedly looked toward invisible clocks. Lumens spoke almost in a whisper. They trust. The keeper's smile deepened. Yes, they trust. The station has never needed departure boards. It has never needed schedules. It has never needed anyone to call out names. He turned toward them. When your next journey is ready, your heart always hears it before your ears do. Silence settled gently around those words. Not empty silence, thoughtful silence, the kind that quietly rearranged something inside a person without asking permission. Elias found himself looking once more across the peaceful platforms. For so much of his life, journeys had meant reaching somewhere, completing something, finding answers. Here, the journey itself seemed willing to wait until the traveler had become ready enough to enjoy it. Perhaps that was why everyone looked so peaceful, not because they had nowhere left to go, but because they no longer feared arriving too late. Outside, one small child quietly awoke beneath a warm blanket, without a single adult speaking. An elderly traveler nearby gently tucked the blanket back around the child's shoulders before returning to his own book. The child smiled sleepily, closed their eyes again, and drifted peacefully back to sleep. The keeper noticed Elias watching. That, he said almost inaudibly, is how this station keeps time. Not with clocks, not with bells, but with small kindnesses that quietly tell every weary heart, you still have enough time. The blossom lantern resting beside Elias answered with another calm golden glow. Inside its glass walls, every blossom remained peacefully open, as though, for the first time since it had been entrusted to him, the lantern itself had found somewhere it no longer needed to hurry beyond. As the peaceful silence settled once more, the station keeper gently reached beneath the reception desk and lifted an old wooden tray. Upon it rested dozens of small cards. Each had been pressed from thick, cream-colored paper that carried tiny silver fibers woven through its surface. No names appeared upon them, no destinations, no numbers, only beautifully illustrated symbols. A feather, a lantern, a river, a key, a mountain, a sleeping bird, a blooming branch. Lumen tilted his head curiously. They're beautiful. What are they for? The keeper carefully placed the tray upon the nearby table. They help new travelers find where they should rest. Mira looked thoughtfully across the collection. They aren't assigned. He smiled. No. The station has learned that hearts choose more honestly than minds. One by one, the travelers quietly approached the tray. No one hurried. No one searched for the most beautiful card. They simply allowed their eyes to wander naturally. Almost immediately, one card seemed to brighten ever so slightly before Elias. It carried the image of a simple lantern resting beneath an open sky. Nothing more. No elaborate artwork. No hidden symbols. Only a lantern, patiently waiting beneath countless stars. Without thinking, Elias gently picked it up. Its paper felt pleasantly warm. Across the table, Mira had quietly chosen a card showing a flowering branch stretching peacefully over calm water. Lumen smiled as he lifted a tiny silver feather whose delicate lines shimmered beneath the lantern light. The station keeper nodded with quiet satisfaction. The station remembers. Lumen looked at his feather. Does this mean something? It means. The keeper paused for a moment. Your heart has already begun walking toward where it wishes to sleep. He gently gathered the remaining cards. No traveler is ever told where they belong. They simply discover that they have already been expected. Outside the great windows, another soft bell drifted across the peaceful platforms, not louder than before, only closer. Somewhere beyond the mist, warm lights slowly began appearing farther down the valley. Not trains, small moving lanterns. They floated gracefully above the silver rails like patient stars descending toward the station. Lumen watched them with wide eyes. They're coming. The keeper looked toward the glowing lights with the quiet smile of someone greeting old friends. No, they've always been coming. We're simply ready to notice them now. Elias slipped the lantern card carefully inside his satchel, beside the folded paper crane. For reasons he could not explain, it already felt less like a keepsake and more like the beginning of another gentle promise. Beyond the windows, the floating lanterns continued drawing slowly nearer through the moonlit mist. None of them hurried. Each moved with the same peaceful certainty that filled every corner of the station, as though every journey, whether beginning or ending, had all the time it would ever need. The floating lanterns continued drifting through the silver mist until they reached the edge of the nearest platform. Only then did Elias realize they were not lanterns at all. Each gentle light hung beneath the roof of a beautifully crafted carriage, unlike any he had ever imagined. There were no wheels, no engine, no smoke rising into the moonlit sky. The graceful carriage simply floated a few inches above the shimmering silver rails, moving with such quiet elegance that even the mist seemed unwilling to disturb its passing. Its polished cedar panels reflected warm amber light. Delicate silver constellations had been carved into every window frame. Flowering vines climbed naturally along its sides without covering the wood, their tiny blossoms glowing softly beneath the moon. Lumen watched in complete wonder. It doesn't sound like anything. The carriage glided to a peaceful stop before them. Not a single creak escaped its polished timbers. Not even the lanterns hanging beneath its roof swayed. The station keeper smiled. They've learned that weary hearts should never be awakened by unnecessary noise. A narrow door slowly opened. Inside waited a room more comforting than Elias had expected. There were no rows of seats. Instead, small reading alcoves curved gently along the walls. Soft armchairs rested beside wide windows. Tiny fireplaces glowed behind crystal glass. Shelves held beautifully bound books, fresh flowers, folded blankets, and steaming teapots that somehow remained perfectly warm. It felt less like boarding a carriage and more like stepping into a quiet sitting room that had chosen to travel. Mira ran her fingers lightly across one of the polished wooden shelves. The craftsmanship, she whispered, has been loved for a very long time. The keeper nodded. Every carriage remembers every peaceful journey it has ever carried. Elias looked thoughtfully around the room. Do they all travel somewhere different? Sometimes the keeper's answer came as gently as falling snow, and sometimes they simply carry travelers until they remember where they truly wish to go. Those words settled quietly within Elias. He thought back to his earliest days inside the hidden library, how desperately he had searched for destinations, how eagerly he had believed that every answer waited somewhere farther ahead. Now, for the first time, he wondered whether certain journeys existed only to create enough quiet for answers already living inside the traveler. Outside the carriage window, another floated silently past, then another. Each carried different lantern colors: soft amber, pale silver, gentle sapphire, warm ivory. None appeared grander than the others. Each simply welcomed a different kind of traveler. The station keeper noticed Elias watching them. No two journeys ask for exactly the same comfort, but every traveler deserves to find the one prepared for them. The blossom lantern, hanging at Elias' side, answered with another calm glow. For just a heartbeat, its golden light reflected perfectly against the carriage window. 2 lanterns, one carried by Elias, one waiting patiently before him, both quietly illuminating the same peaceful night, without anyone needing to say so. Elias understood. This station did not help travelers escape their journeys. It helped them continue them. With lighter hearts, the station keeper gently closed the carriage door once more. It did not latch with a click. Instead, the polished cedar settled softly into place, as though it had simply become comfortable again. "These carriages do not leave on command," he said. "They leave when a traveler's heart has become quieter than when it arrived." Lumen looked thoughtfully toward the glowing windows, so someone could stay for days. The keeper smiled. They could remain for months. They could remain for years. No one here measures rest by time. They measure it by peace. Outside, a soft breeze carried hundreds of tiny silver leaves across the platforms, not from nearby trees. Elias looked upward. High above the station floated graceful branches, unlike any he had seen before. They stretched across the night sky, their silver leaves drifting lazily downward without ever becoming bare. Every leaf landed gently upon the platforms, then quietly dissolved into tiny points of warm light before disappearing altogether. Mira watched them with quiet affection. "I've heard stories about these, the resting trees." The keeper nodded. "They bloom whenever someone finally lets go of a burden they have carried for too long." Lumen reached out as one silver leaf floated slowly toward him. This time, he did not try to catch it. He simply held out his open palm. The leaf settled there for only a heartbeat before becoming a tiny golden light that quietly faded into the air. It left behind neither warmth nor cold, only an unexpected feeling of lightness, almost as though something invisible had quietly smiled. Elias watched another leaf drift past his shoulder. He found himself wondering how many unseen burdens he had already laid down without ever realizing it. The meadow had taught him stillness. The bridge had taught him patience. The pavilion had taught him quiet kindness. Now, the station seemed ready to teach something even gentler: how to rest without feeling guilty for doing so. The thought lingered peacefully inside him. For so many travelers, Rest felt earned only after every task had been completed, every responsibility fulfilled, every promise kept. Yet the station seemed to whisper something entirely different. Sometimes rest itself was what allowed the remaining promises to be fulfilled. A nearby platform lantern brightened softly. Almost immediately, one floating carriage began gliding away into the silver mist. No bell announced its departure. No passengers waved goodbye. Those remaining upon the platform simply smiled quietly toward the disappearing lights before returning to their books, their tea, their conversations, their peaceful silence. There was no sadness in watching someone leave, only quiet happiness that another traveler had become ready. The keeper noticed Elias following the slowly vanishing carriage. "It never becomes easier," he said softly. "What doesn't?" Watching good people continue their journeys. He smiled gently, but it becomes more beautiful every time. The last warm lantern disappeared into the drifting mist. Silence returned once more, not because something had ended, but because somewhere beyond the silver hills, another beautiful beginning had quietly taken its place. The peaceful silence lingered long after the last carriage had disappeared into the silver mist. No one seemed eager to fill it. Here, silence was never something that needed fixing. It was something quietly shared. The station keeper gently reached into the pocket of his charcoal blue coat. From within, he withdrew 3 small objects wrapped in soft, cream-colored cloth. He unfolded the first bundle before Elias. Resting inside lay a beautifully carved wooden token no larger than the palm of his hand. Upon one side, an elegant lantern had been engraved beneath a sky filled with tiny stars. The reverse carried only a single sentence. Asterisk asterisk rest is also part of the road. Asterisk asterisk Elias traced the delicate carving with his thumb. The wood felt smooth from countless careful polishings, not worn by age, but cherished by gentle hands. The keeper folded Elias' fingers softly around the token. Every traveler receives one. They are never returned. They are carried. Mira opened her own bundle. Inside rested a flowering branch carved from pale cherry wood. Its reverse read, asterisk asterisk bloom where peace finds you. Asterisk asterisk. She smiled quietly before slipping it into the small pocket inside her satchel. Lumen carefully unfolded the final cloth. A tiny silver feather rested inside. Its simple inscription read, asterisk asterisk, wonder travels lightly. Asterisk asterisk, his eyes brightened. I'll never lose this. The keeper chuckled softly. No, I don't believe you will. For a little while, the four of them simply stood together beneath the warm lantern light. Outside, dawn had still not arrived, yet the sky had begun changing almost imperceptibly. The deep midnight blue above the station slowly softened into rich indigo. One by one, the brightest stars quietly disappeared, not because they had faded, only because morning had begun carrying them somewhere else. Elias slipped the wooden lantern token carefully into his satchel beside the folded paper crane and the lantern card he had chosen earlier. 3 small keepsakes, 3 quiet reminders, none valuable because of what they were, only because of what they gently helped him remember. The blossom lantern hanging beside him answered with its warmest glow yet. Every blossom inside remained peacefully open. Its light no longer pulsed. It simply rested, calm, steady, content. The station keeper looked toward the broad eastern windows. "I believe," he said softly, "someone has finished resting." Almost at that very moment, one distant bell rang. Only once, far beyond the silver platforms, another floating carriage slowly emerged from the morning mist. Its lanterns glowed with the gentle amber light of sunrise. It moved without haste toward the waiting station, not arriving too early, not arriving too late, only exactly when it was needed. Elias watched it quietly. For the first time in many journeys, he found himself completely content, not knowing who would step through its doors. Some stories did not become beautiful because they were known. They became beautiful because someone had patiently prepared a peaceful place for them to begin. And somewhere beyond the slowly brightening mist, another weary traveler was already finding their way home. Somewhere beyond the slowly brightening mist, the newly arrived carriage came gently to rest beside the eastern platform. Its warm amber lanterns reflected softly across the silver rails before gradually becoming still. No one hurried toward its doors. The station itself seemed content to allow every arrival the same quiet dignity it offered every departure. The elderly station keeper rested his hands behind his back. "They are awake." Lumen looked curiously toward the waiting carriage. "How do you know?" The keeper smiled. "Because the carriage has stopped listening." Lumen blinked. Listening for sleeping hearts. The answer settled gently between them. Moments later, the carriage door slowly opened. An elderly woman stepped down first. Her silver hair rested neatly beneath a woolen shawl, the color of morning clouds. She paused upon the platform, closed her eyes, and drew one long, peaceful breath before smiling quietly to herself. Behind her came a young father carrying a sleeping child against his shoulder. The little girl never stirred. Her tiny hand remained wrapped around a small cloth rabbit worn soft by years of love. The father looked neither exhausted nor hurried, only grateful. A third traveler appeared. He was a middle-aged man, dressed in a weathered travel coat, whose boots carried the pale dust of many distant roads. Yet the moment both feet touched the platform, his shoulders relaxed, almost imperceptibly, as though some invisible weight had quietly chosen to remain behind inside the carriage. No one welcomed them with applause. No announcements echoed beneath the station roof. Instead, the nearby travelers simply smiled. Some inclined their heads gently. Others lifted warm cups of tea in silent greeting. The newcomers returned those quiet smiles with equal warmth. No introductions seemed necessary. It was the kind of welcome shared by people who all understood the same gentle truth. Every person arriving here had already traveled farther than anyone else could fully see. The elderly woman slowly approached the station keeper. He bowed respectfully. "Welcome." She returned the gesture. "It's good to be back," not "It's good to finally arrive," but "It's good to be back." Elias quietly noticed the difference. Perhaps no traveler ever truly arrived here for the first time. Perhaps every peaceful heart eventually found its way back to places that had always been quietly waiting. The young father carried his sleeping daughter toward one of the warm fireplaces. Without needing to ask, another traveler quietly unfolded a nearby blanket and placed it across the empty chair waiting beside the fire. The father smiled gratefully. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Across the platform, the weathered traveler removed his heavy satchel. For several long moments, he simply stood holding it. Then, very gently, he set it upon the ground. He smiled, not because the satchel had become lighter, but because, for the first time in a very long while, he no longer felt obliged to carry it alone. Elias watched quietly. The station had taught many lessons already, yet perhaps its greatest lesson required no words at all. Sometimes the kindest welcome anyone could receive was simply discovering that someone had already prepared a place where they could finally put down what they had been carrying. The weathered traveler remained beside his satchel for a little while longer. No one encouraged him to move. No one offered advice. The station understood that certain moments became meaningful only when allowed to unfold at their own gentle pace. Eventually, the elderly station keeper walked quietly toward him. He carried nothing in his hands, no forms, no ledger, no questions waiting to be answered. He simply stood beside the traveler and looked across the peaceful platforms. For several moments, they watched the station together without speaking. Finally, the traveler smiled faintly. "I thought it would feel different." The keeper nodded. "It usually does." I imagined relief would arrive all at once. Another gentle nod. "But it hasn't. No, it rarely does." The keeper looked toward the silver mist drifting beyond the station roofs. Peace usually arrives the way morning does. Not all at once, but little by little, until one day you realize the darkness quietly left without asking permission. The traveler lowered his eyes. "I've carried this satchel for 19 years. Elias glanced toward the worn leather bag, resting peacefully upon the platform. Its straps had faded with age. Its corners had softened from countless journeys. It did not appear unusually heavy. Yet somehow, everyone nearby understood that its true weight had never belonged to leather or cloth. The traveler smiled to himself. "I don't even remember everything inside anymore." The keeper answered gently. "That happens. We become so accustomed to carrying certain things that we forget we were ever free without them." A quiet breeze wandered through the station. One silver leaf drifted lazily from the resting trees overhead. It landed softly upon the satchel. For a single peaceful heartbeat. Nothing happened then. The leaf dissolved into tiny golden light. The old leather seemed to brighten ever so slightly beneath the morning sky. Not transformed, simply lighter. The traveler noticed it immediately. "So," he whispered, "that's all it takes." The keeper smiled warmly. "No, it only takes willingness. The station simply knows how to recognize it." Across the platform, the little girl sleeping beside the fireplace slowly opened her eyes. She looked around with quiet curiosity before climbing gently from her father's lap, still holding her worn cloth rabbit. She wandered toward a nearby flower bed filled with tiny silver blossoms. She crouched beside them, not to pick them, only to admire them. One blossom slowly opened. Inside rested a tiny golden seed, no larger than a raindrop. The little girl smiled with complete delight. She never reached for it. She simply whispered, "Good morning." The blossom seemed almost to glow brighter in return. Elias found himself smiling. Children, he realized, often understood the hidden library more naturally than adults. They rarely hurried to explain wonder. They simply welcomed it. Somewhere above the platforms, another silver leaf began its slow, peaceful descent, and the station continued quietly, doing what it had perhaps always done best, helping hearts become just a little lighter one gentle moment at a time. The little girl remained beside the silver blossoms long after her father had quietly settled into a nearby chair. She spoke no more words. She simply watched. Every so often, another tiny blossom unfolded. Another golden seed shimmered softly within its petals. Nothing extraordinary happened, yet somehow nothing else seemed necessary. The station keeper noticed Elias watching her. Children remind this place of something. Elias turned gently toward him. What do they remind it of? The keeper's smile carried the quiet warmth of someone remembering an old friend. That wonder never asks to be understood before it is loved. Those words lingered softly in the morning air. Lumen slowly sat beside the flower bed. Not too close, not too far. The little girl looked toward him with curious eyes. He smiled. She smiled back. Then both quietly returned their attention to the blossoms. No introductions, no awkward conversation. Only two young hearts peacefully sharing the same quiet discovery. Nearby, the weathered traveler finally lifted his satchel once more. This time, he raised it with one hand. His expression changed immediately. A surprised laugh escaped before he could stop it. It really is lighter. The keeper chuckled. No, you are. The traveler stood silently for a moment. Then, almost without thinking, he loosened the satchel straps. One by one, he removed several old journals tied together with faded ribbon, a cracked compass, a small wooden box, bundles of folded letters. He looked at each item carefully, not with sadness, with gratitude. Finally, he held up the oldest journal. Its leather cover had nearly worn smooth with time. I've carried this everywhere. The keeper nodded patiently. Do you still need to? The traveler looked toward the journal, then toward the peaceful station. For a long while, he answered nothing. At last, he slowly walked toward a beautiful oak cabinet, standing beneath one broad window. Its shelves contained dozens of journals, boxes, tiny keepsakes, photographs, pressed flowers, each carefully labeled only with the date they had been entrusted to the station. No names, only moments. The traveler gently placed his journal upon an empty shelf. He rested his hand upon it one final time, then quietly stepped back. Nothing dramatic happened. No magical light, no mysterious music, only his shoulders relaxed a little more than before. The keeper smiled. The station keeps safe. Only the things people are finally ready to stop carrying. Elias gazed thoughtfully at the growing collection. So someday, someone else may read those journals. The keeper shook his head gently. No, they belong only to those who leave them. The station protects memories. It never collects them. Those words settled deeply inside Elias. He understood now. The hidden library never asked travelers to forget their past, only to stop allowing it to weigh down every step that still remained ahead. Outside, another floating carriage quietly arrived through the silver morning mist. Its lanterns glowed pale, sapphire this time. Different travelers, different stories, the same peaceful welcome. The station continued breathing gently beneath the slowly brightening sky, patiently making room for hearts that had carried enough for one lifetime. Morning continued arriving so gently that no one could say exactly when the night had ended. The lanterns still glowed warmly beneath the station roof, yet now their golden light blended peacefully with the first pale silver rays drifting across the valley. Nothing competed. Everything simply belonged together. The elderly station keeper slowly closed the cabinet that now held the weathered traveler's journal. The polished oak door settled softly into place. No lock, no key, only trust. Lumen watched curiously. So the station keeps things, but only until people need them again. The keeper nodded. Sometimes, and sometimes, they are never needed again. He looked thoughtfully toward the peaceful platforms. The station never decides. It only remembers where they are. Elias quietly admired the cabinet. Each shelf contained objects that had once traveled thousands of miles beside someone. A faded ribbon, a tiny carved bird, an old map carefully folded, a cracked pair of spectacles. Nothing valuable by ordinary standards. Yet each item had once carried part of someone's story. The hidden library protected books. The station protected moments. A gentle knock echoed from somewhere farther along the waiting hall. Not loud, merely polite. The station keeper smiled almost immediately. Our baker. Moments later, a broad wooden cart rolled peacefully into the room. Its wheels barely whispered against the polished floor. An elderly woman guided it carefully forward. Her silver hair had been gathered into a loose braid beneath a linen scarf, dusted lightly with flour. Fresh bread rested upon woven baskets covered by warm linen cloths. The comforting fragrance spread through the hall almost instantly. Warm oats, honey, butter, cinnamon, fresh herbs gathered before dawn. Every traveler nearby smiled, almost without realizing why. The woman laughed softly. I see everyone survived another peaceful night. The keeper chuckled. So far, she began placing warm loaves upon a nearby cedar table, not counting them, not arranging them perfectly, simply trusting there would always be enough. The little girl carrying her cloth rabbit wandered over carefully. The baker smiled warmly. "I've been expecting you." The child looked surprised. "You have?" "Of course. I baked one smaller loaf, just your size." From beneath the cloth, she lifted a tiny round loaf shaped like a sleeping star. The little girl's eyes widened with quiet delight. She accepted it carefully with both hands, not tearing into it immediately, only smiling as though someone had just remembered something very important. Nearby, the young father quietly thanked the baker. She simply waved the gratitude away. No one thanks breakfast. It arrives because mornings deserve kindness. Elias found himself smiling again. Another ordinary sentence, another extraordinary truth. He had begun noticing that nearly everyone inside the station spoke this way. Simple words, quiet meanings, no speeches, no lessons, only small truths gently offered whenever someone happened to need them. The blossom lantern resting beside him glowed softly. Its warm light reflected across the fresh bread, polished wood, smiling travelers, and peaceful morning. For a brief moment, Elias wondered if perhaps this was what hope truly looked like. Not grand miracles, not impossible magic, only ordinary kindness, appearing so faithfully that it slowly became something extraordinary. After breakfast, the station became even quieter, not because fewer travelers remained, but because everyone seemed gently settled into the rhythm of the morning. Some returned to their books. Others wandered slowly through the flowering gardens surrounding the platforms. Several travelers simply sat beneath the resting trees, watching silver leaves drift across the peaceful air. No one searched for something to do. The station never asked anyone to stay busy. It only invited them to remain present. The elderly baker carefully folded the empty linen cloths covering her baskets. Before returning her cart, she noticed Elias watching the gardens beyond the windows. "You haven't visited the clock garden yet." Elias looked toward her curiously. "The clock garden," she smiled. "Every station has one." Without another word, she gently pointed toward a winding stone path, disappearing behind flowering hedges. Mira's eyes brightened with recognition. "I've heard stories. They say the flowers bloom according to forgotten moments." The baker nodded softly. "They do." The four companions stepped outside together. Morning dew rested upon every blade of silver grass. Tiny birds with pale blue feathers hopped peacefully among the flower beds, singing melodies so gentle they They sounded almost like whispered breathing. The winding path curved through archways woven entirely from flowering vines. Sunlight filtered softly between the leaves, blending with the lingering silver glow of moonlight. Neither light seemed eager to replace the other. Instead, they shared the morning. Soon, the path opened into a circular garden, unlike anything Elias had ever seen. Hundreds of flowering plants grew peacefully around a broad stone fountain. Each flower was completely different. Some had only just begun opening. Others stood in magnificent full bloom. Some quietly released drifting seeds into the breeze. Others had already become empty stems, waiting patiently for another season. Yet somehow, all of them existed together in perfect harmony. Lumen slowly turned in a complete circle. They're all different ages. The baker smiled warmly. No, they are different moments. She knelt beside one tiny white blossom, barely beginning to unfold. This flower opens the first time someone forgives themselves. She pointed toward a magnificent golden blossom glowing near the fountain. That one blooms when someone finally understands they were loved far more than they ever believed. Elias quietly walked farther into the garden. His eyes wandered from flower to flower. None carried names, only feelings somehow expressed through color, fragrance, and quiet beauty. Near the center of the garden stood a single unopened blossom, unlike all the others. Its petals shimmered softly with pale silver light. It remained completely closed, patient, peaceful, waiting. The baker joined him quietly. It hasn't opened yet. Elias looked toward her. What does it represent? She smiled gently. No one knows. Not until the day it blooms. He continued studying the silent flower. Strangely, its unopened petals did not seem lonely. They seemed hopeful, as though some beautiful moment already existed somewhere ahead, simply waiting for the right heart to arrive. The fountain beside them continued singing softly beneath the morning sky. Around it, flowers bloomed without hurry, without comparison, without wondering why another blossom had opened first. Each simply trusted that its own beautiful season would come exactly when it was meant to. Elias remained beside the unopened silver blossom long after the others had wandered quietly through the garden. He never reached toward it, never wondered how to make it bloom. For the first time in many journeys, he simply accepted that some beautiful things were never meant to be hurried. The elderly baker watched him with quiet approval. Most travelers ask me the same question. Elias smiled gently. They ask when it will open. She laughed softly. They do. And what do you tell them? I tell them, she looked toward the peaceful flower, that flowers have never once asked the calendar for permission to bloom. The words drifted into the gentle morning like petals upon still water. Nearby, Lumen had discovered a tiny stone bench beneath a flowering tree. He sat beside it, watching pale butterflies wander from blossom to blossom without ever choosing the same flower twice. They don't seem lost. Mira joined him. They aren't looking for somewhere else. They're simply enjoying where they already are. Lumen smiled thoughtfully. I think I understand. She looked at him with quiet curiosity. What do you understand? He watched another butterfly drift lazily through the warm air. When we stop worrying about missing tomorrow, today becomes much bigger. Mira's smile held unmistakable pride. That's a lesson some travelers spend an entire lifetime searching for. The gentle fountain continued singing nearby. Its crystal water reflected the silver blossoms, the blue morning sky, and the enormous crescent moon that still lingered faintly above the valley. Neither wished to disappear before the other. Morning and night shared the same peaceful sky, just as endings and beginnings often quietly shared the same heart. The baker slowly rose. The garden has one final tradition. She led them toward the fountain's edge. Beside the water rested a shallow wooden bowl filled with tiny smooth white stones. Each stone was perfectly blank. No names, no wishes, no promises. She handed one stone to each traveler. We simply carry them for today. Lumen looked puzzled. That's all. She nodded. When evening comes, you'll know whether it wishes to stay with you. Elias gently turned the small white stone between his fingers. It felt wonderfully ordinary, cool, smooth, comfortably weightless. Strangely, that made it feel even more valuable, not because it possessed magic, but because it quietly invited attention, the kind of attention ordinary moments rarely received. He slipped the little stone into his pocket beside the wooden lantern token. Another simple reminder, another gentle companion for the road ahead. As the four travelers slowly left the clock garden, Elias glanced back one final time. The unopened silver blossom remained exactly as it had been before. Peaceful, patient, hopeful. For just the briefest heartbeat, he thought he saw one tiny petal move, ever so slightly, beneath the morning breeze. Perhaps it had, perhaps it hadn't. Either way, he smiled. Some mysteries did not become beautiful because they were solved. They became beautiful because they quietly reminded every traveler that tomorrow still carried gentle surprises, waiting patiently to bloom. The white stone rested quietly in Elias' pocket as they left the clock garden behind. It weighed almost nothing, yet every now and then he found himself gently touching it, as though reassuring himself it was still there. The station baker noticed. They usually do that. Elias smiled. Carry the stone. She shook her head. No. They check whether they've forgotten it. She looked warmly toward him, and almost always they discover they've actually been remembering themselves. The winding garden path slowly returned them toward the heart of the station. Morning had now fully arrived. Warm sunlight drifted gently across polished wooden platforms. The great crescent moon still lingered above the western hills, softer now, like an old friend quietly watching the day begin before taking its own well-earned rest. Birdsong replaced the deeper silence of dawn, not loudly, only enough to remind every traveler that another peaceful day had already begun. As they approached the central waiting hall once more, Elias noticed something he had somehow overlooked before. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of beautifully carved wooden benches lined the station. Yet no two were exactly alike. Some carried tiny stars carved into their arms. Others displayed flowering vines. Some were decorated with rivers, others with feathers, keys, lanterns, clouds. Every bench seemed quietly different. The station keeper noticed Elias studying them. You found our listening benches. Elias looked at him curiously. They listen. The keeper chuckled. Only better than most people. Lumen laughed softly. I like them already. The keeper invited them toward a bench carved with delicate flowering branches. It rested beneath an enormous skylight where warm sunlight mingled peacefully with the last silver light of the fading moon. Sit. No explanation followed, only the invitation. The companions quietly took their places. At first, nothing happened. Travelers continued passing peacefully through the hall. Tea gently steamed from nearby tables. Soft footsteps echoed across polished timber floors. Everything remained wonderfully ordinary. Then Elias noticed something unexpected. The station suddenly felt quieter, not because the sounds had disappeared, but because they no longer seemed to demand his attention. Each sound simply existed, without asking to be followed, without asking to be judged. The gentle laughter nearby, the turning of book pages, the distant singing cattle, the fluttering wings of birds beyond the windows. Everything blended together into one peaceful rhythm, almost like breathing. The keeper smiled knowingly. The benches never remove noise. They simply help people stop carrying it. Elias closed his eyes for a single peaceful moment. He had never realized how many small sounds he normally held inside himself, how many conversations, how many unfinished thoughts, how many tiny worries continued speaking long after they had become unnecessary. Here, they quietly drifted away, one by one, like silver leaves floating beyond the station roof. When he finally opened his eyes again, the world looked exactly the same, yet somehow it felt lighter. The keeper nodded gently. "Now," he whispered, "you're finally beginning to hear the station." For a little while, none of them spoke. The listening bench seemed perfectly content with silence. Sunlight continued drifting slowly across the polished floor, warming the carved wooden branches beneath their hands. Travelers passed nearby. Some smiled, some nodded, others simply continued peacefully on their way. Nothing interrupted the quiet rhythm surrounding the bench. Eventually, Lumen spoke almost in a whisper. "I thought listening meant hearing." The station keeper smiled. "So do most people." He looked toward the wide station windows, where morning light shimmered across the silver rails. "But hearing fills the ears. Listening," he gently rested one hand upon the carved bench, "creates room inside the heart." Elias considered those words. Perhaps that explained why the station never seemed crowded. There were travelers everywhere. Carriages arrived and departed. Lanterns glowed. Conversations drifted gently through the halls. Yet somehow, everything still felt spacious. The station had learned how to leave room between moments. Room for breathing. Room for noticing. Room for simply being. A young woman quietly approached the listening bench from the opposite side of the hall. She carried no luggage, only a folded letter tied with pale blue ribbon. She smiled politely. "May I?" The keeper nodded warmly. "There's always room." She sat at the far end of the bench. No introductions followed. No questions. She simply rested both hands upon the folded letter and gazed peacefully toward the gardens outside. Several minutes passed. Nothing happened. Or perhaps many quiet things happened all at once. The woman's breathing gradually slowed. The anxious tension around her shoulders softened. Her fingers, which had tightly held the ribbon, slowly relaxed. Finally, she smiled to herself, not because she had solved anything, but because something inside her no longer needed solving today. She stood quietly, bowed her head toward the keeper. "Thank you." He smiled gently. "I don't believe you've spoken to me." She laughed softly. "I know." She tucked the folded letter safely inside her coat, then continued peacefully through the station. Lumen watched her disappear beyond the archway. But You didn't help. The keeper looked almost amused. Didn't I? You never even spoke. He nodded. Sometimes being given a peaceful place to think is far kinder than being given another answer. Those words lingered quietly. Elias found himself remembering countless moments before discovering the hidden library. How often people had rushed to fix sadness, correct uncertainty, silence fear. Yet here, no one hurried another person's heart. Healing seemed to unfold the same way flowers bloomed, patiently, without being pulled open. The white stone resting inside Elias' pocket suddenly felt a little warmer beneath his fingertips. Not magically, simply, comfortingly, as though it had quietly noticed that another gentle lesson had found its place within him. Outside, a soft breeze stirred the flowering vines climbing across the station walls. Hundreds of tiny blossoms swayed together beneath the morning sky. None struggled to bloom first. None feared blooming last. Each simply trusted that being present was already enough. The morning unfolded with the same quiet patience the station offered every traveler. No clock announced the passing hours. No bell reminded anyone to hurry. Instead, the sunlight itself slowly wandered across the polished wooden floor, painting long ribbons of gold between the carved pillars. The station keeper rose from the listening bench. I'd like to show you something. Elias, Mira, and Lumen followed him toward the northern side of the station. The hall gradually grew quieter, not emptier, only gentler. The cheerful conversations faded behind them until they became little more than warm echoes carried by the timber beams. Soon they reached a narrow wooden bridge, crossing a small indoor stream. Crystal clear water flowed peacefully beneath polished stone. Tiny silver fish drifted lazily through its gentle current. The bridge itself was simple. No grand carvings, no glowing lanterns, only smooth cedar wood polished by countless peaceful footsteps. Beyond the bridge stood a single wooden door. Unlike every other doorway inside the station, this one carried no sign, no symbol, no destination, only beautifully aged cedar. The station keeper rested his hand upon the brass handle. This room welcomes only those who stop looking for it. Lumen frowned thoughtfully, but we found it. The keeper smiled. No, you stopped searching. The words settled gently between them. He slowly opened the door. Warm sunlight entered first. Then came the fragrance. Fresh cedar, old paper, wild lavender, rain upon stone. The room beyond was surprisingly small, almost humble. Only a circular window overlooked the eastern gardens. A single wooden table rested at the center. Beside it stood 4 comfortable chairs. Along the curved walls, nothing. No shelves, no paintings, no decorations. The room felt almost empty, yet somehow it never felt incomplete. Mira looked around quietly. It feels. She searched for the right word. Finished. The keeper nodded. This is the quiet room. It contains only what cannot distract. Elias slowly entered. Immediately, the world beyond the doorway seemed wonderfully distant. The conversations outside, the footsteps, the gentle singing cattle, everything remained, yet nothing reached inside strongly enough to disturb the peaceful stillness waiting there. Upon the center of the wooden table rested one small object, a simple hourglass. Its glass shimmered faintly beneath the sunlight, yet no sand flowed between its chambers. It remained perfectly still. Lumen leaned closer. "It's broken." The keeper smiled warmly. "No, it simply refuses to measure peaceful moments." Elias could not help smiling. The hidden library possessed magical books, living lanterns, returning blossoms, floating carriages. Yet somehow, this unmoving hourglass felt every bit as extraordinary, perhaps because it quietly reminded every traveler that not every beautiful moment wished to become a number. The keeper gently pulled back one of the chairs. "Sit for as long as you like. No conversation is expected. No answers are required. The room asks only one thing." Elias looked toward him. "What is that?" The keeper's smile was almost invisible. "Stay long enough to notice that nothing inside you is asking to leave." Silence welcomed them once more. Not empty silence, home. The quiet room asked for nothing. That, Elias slowly realized, was what made it so extraordinary. Every place he had visited before entering the hidden library had quietly expected something in return. Attention, effort, conversation, achievement, even rest often came with the feeling that it must somehow be earned. Here, nothing waited to be earned. The 4 companions settled comfortably around the small cedar table. The unmoving hourglass remained peacefully at its center. Sunlight drifted through the circular window, slowly painting warm patterns across the polished wood. Outside, lavender flowers swayed gently in the morning breeze. No one reached for the hourglass. No one wondered why its sand refused to fall. It simply belonged there, like a reminder that not everything meaningful wished to be counted. Several peaceful minutes passed, or perhaps much longer, inside the quiet room. Such questions quietly lost their importance. Lumen eventually looked toward the window. "I've stopped thinking." The station keeper smiled softly. "No, you've stopped chasing your thoughts. There is a difference." Lumen considered that for a moment, then nodded. "I think." He paused. "They've become slower." The keeper looked warmly toward him. "Thoughts are much like birds. The harder we run after them, the farther away they fly. But when we become still, many quietly choose to return on their own." Elias found himself smiling. He thought of the tiny silver birds singing outside the clock garden. None had ever been caught, yet all had remained nearby. Perhaps peaceful thoughts behaved the same way. Across the table, Mira rested one hand lightly upon the smooth surface of the cedar wood. "I understand now." Elias looked toward her. "What do you understand?" She gazed thoughtfully toward the unmoving hourglass. "The hidden library has never tried to change us. It simply keeps bringing us to places where we slowly change ourselves." Silence gently followed her words, not because anyone wished to answer, but because nothing needed adding. The station keeper quietly closed his eyes. So many travelers arrive believing wisdom is something another person gives them. He opened his eyes again. The library knows better. Wisdom grows. It cannot be handed from one heart to another. It must quietly bloom where kindness, patience, and wonder have already prepared the soil. Elias lowered his eyes toward the white stone resting in his palm. The smooth surface reflected a tiny circle of sunlight. He suddenly remembered every keepsake he now carried: the folded paper crane, the traveler's blossom, the blossom lantern, the brass blossom key, the lantern token, the destination card, the white stone. Each had entered his journey quietly. None had promised to solve his life, yet together they gently reminded him of every lesson his heart had already begun learning. Outside, a single silver butterfly drifted slowly past the circular window. It paused for only a heartbeat before continuing toward the flowering gardens. No one pointed. No one interrupted the silence. They simply watched it go. And somehow, that felt like exactly enough. At last, the station keeper quietly rose from his chair. The movement felt so gentle that it seemed less like standing and more like the room itself had slowly unfolded around him. The quiet room has one final gift. Elias looked toward the peaceful old caretaker. "What is it?" The keeper smiled. "It helps travelers notice something they already carry." Without another word, he walked toward the circular window. Beneath it rested a simple wooden chest no larger than a writing desk. Its cedar lid bore no lock, no keyhole, only a beautifully carved crescent moon surrounded by tiny stars. The keeper lifted the lid. Inside rested dozens of perfectly polished mirrors. No two were alike. Some round, some oval, some framed in smooth oak, others in flowering cherry wood or silver birch. Yet every mirror reflected with extraordinary clarity. Lumen blinked. Mirrors. The keeper nodded. Choose whichever one feels quiet. Not beautiful, not impressive, simply quiet. One by one, they approached the chest. Mira selected a graceful oval mirror, framed with flowering vines. Lumen chose a tiny round mirror, no larger than his hand. Elias hesitated. Near the bottom of the chest rested a simple rectangular mirror, framed only with smooth cedar. Nothing decorated it. Nothing called attention to it. He gently lifted it free. The glass reflected his face perfectly. The same familiar eyes, the same traveler, the same cloak. Nothing magical appeared. The keeper watched patiently. What do you see? Elias smiled faintly. Myself. The keeper tilted his head kindly. Look again. Elias remained silent. He studied the reflection more carefully. The room behind him, the warm sunlight, the cedar table, the peaceful hourglass, still, only himself. I don't understand. The keeper smiled with quiet affection. Good. Understanding comes later. For now, simply notice. So Elias did. He noticed that the tension he once carried around his eyes had softened. He noticed that his shoulders rested lower than before. He noticed that somewhere during these many journeys, his expression had quietly become calmer, not happier, not wiser, simply more at home. He had not seen those changes while they were happening. Only now, reflected gently back to him. Beside him, Lumen laughed softly. My face looks different. Mira smiled. Perhaps your heart does too. The little remark carried no teasing, only warmth. The keeper slowly closed the chest. Once everyone had returned their mirrors. They never show people who they wish to become. They simply remind them how beautifully they've already begun changing. Those words settled deeply inside Elias. The hidden library had never asked him to become someone else. It had only offered quiet places where the person he truly was could slowly emerge. Outside the window, the silver butterfly returned once more. This time, it rested briefly upon the lavender before quietly continuing toward the morning sky. No one followed it. No one tried to hold it. Some beautiful things were meant only to be noticed, and that Elias realized was more than enough. The quiet room slowly returned its borrowed silence to the station. No announcement marked their departure. No farewell echoed through the cedar walls. The room simply remained exactly as it had always been, ready to welcome the next traveler, who needed nothing more than a peaceful place to become quietly present again. The station keeper gently closed the cedar door behind them. It settled into place without a sound, as though silence itself had softly pulled it closed. They crossed the little wooden bridge once more. The silver fish continued gliding beneath the crystal water. The flowering gardens shimmered beneath the late morning sun. Everything appeared exactly as before. Yet Elias knew something had changed. Not outside, within. The white stone rested warmly inside his pocket, almost absent, almost forgotten. He smiled to himself. Perhaps that had been its purpose all along, not to demand attention, but to quietly become part of the traveler carrying it. As they entered the central hall once again, the elderly baker was preparing another basket of fresh bread. The fragrance drifted gently through the station. The little girl with the cloth rabbit laughed as tiny birds gathered near the flower beds. The weathered traveler now walked lightly through the platforms, with only a single satchel across his shoulder. The elderly woman who had arrived at dawn sat peacefully beside a window, reading a book with the unhurried contentment of someone who no longer feared the passing of time. Everywhere Elias looked, nothing extraordinary seemed to be happening, and somehow that felt like the greatest wonder of all. The station had quietly transformed ordinary moments into places where peace naturally lived. Perhaps that had always been its true magic. The station keeper stopped beside the great departure board, suspended high above the platforms. Its elegant brass letters slowly shifted of their own accord, not displaying destinations, not displaying departure times. Instead, one simple sentence gradually appeared across its polished surface. Asterisk, asterisk. Every traveler leaves lighter than they arrived. Asterisk, asterisk. The companions stood quietly beneath the message. Lumen looked upward with a thoughtful smile. I believe that's true. The keeper looked warmly toward him. It already is. He gently reached into his coat once more. From within, he removed 4 tiny cedar bookmarks tied with silver thread. Each carried the same beautifully carved image: a peaceful wooden bench beneath a flowering tree. On the reverse, only a single sentence had been engraved. Asterisk, asterisk, leave room inside your day for quiet. Asterisk, asterisk, one by one. He placed a bookmark into each traveler's hand. No ceremony, no reward, only a reminder. Elias slipped the small bookmark safely inside the book, resting within his satchel. Another quiet companion, another gentle lesson. The blossom lantern beside him glowed with calm, steady warmth. Its blossoms no longer shimmered brightly. They rested just as the station itself rested, content, patient, ready, far beyond the great eastern windows. The silver rails disappeared once again into peaceful morning mist. Somewhere beyond them, another destination quietly waited, not calling, not demanding, simply waiting with the same gentle patience every corner of the hidden library seemed to possess. Elias smiled toward the endless rails. For the first time, he realized he no longer wondered how long the journey ahead might be. He wondered only what quiet kindness would be waiting when he arrived. Some journeys ended with a farewell. Others ended so quietly that no one realized they had already become a beginning. The eastern platforms slowly disappeared behind Elias and his companions as they followed the silver railway one final time. The station for sleeping travelers remained exactly as it had always been. Peaceful, patient, ready for every weary heart that would one day arrive. No one looked back immediately. There was no sadness in leaving, only gratitude. The station keeper walked with them as far as the old cedar gate, standing at the edge of the station grounds. Beyond it, the silver rails gradually dissolved into a narrow woodland path winding through ancient birch trees. Soft sunlight filtered between their white trunks. The world beyond felt wonderfully fresh. The keeper stopped beside the gate. "This is where I remain." Lumen smiled. "You never leave." The old man looked thoughtfully toward the station behind him. "I do. Every day." Lumen blinked. "But you're always here." The keeper chuckled gently. "A person doesn't leave only with their feet. Sometimes part of your heart quietly travels with every soul you've helped." Mira lowered her head respectfully. "Then you've traveled farther than any of us." The keeper smiled. "I've simply stayed long enough for many journeys to pass beside me." For a few peaceful moments, no one spoke. The silver breeze wandered softly through the birch leaves overhead. Their quiet rustling sounded almost like pages turning inside a distant library. At last, the keeper reached into the pocket of his weathered blue coat. He withdrew one final object, a tiny silver railway whistle. Its polished surface shimmered gently beneath the morning light. Unlike ordinary whistles, it held no opening for breath, no mechanism, only beautifully engraved rails winding beneath a crescent moon. He placed it carefully into Elias' hand. "It will never make a sound." Elias looked at it curiously. "Then why carry it?" The keeper's smile deepened. "So you'll remember that not every invitation arrives as a voice. Some arrive as quiet readiness." Elias gently closed his fingers around the little whistle. Its cool silver felt wonderfully familiar. Another small companion, another gentle reminder. The keeper stepped back toward the station gate. "I believe," he smiled warmly at all three travelers, "someone is already waiting for you farther ahead." Lumen looked eagerly down the woodland path. "Who?" The keeper simply shook his head. "If I answered, I'd steal the joy of meeting them." The companions laughed softly. One final bow was exchanged. No promises, no dramatic farewells, only warm smiles shared between friends who already trusted they would meet again whenever the road quietly chose. Together, Elias, Mira, and Lumen stepped beyond the cedar gate. Behind them, the station remained glowing peacefully beneath the gentle morning sky. Ahead, the woodland path curved gracefully into silver light, and somewhere beyond the birch trees, another gentle chapter of the hidden library was already waiting to be discovered. The woodland path welcomed them without asking where they had come from. Soft moss covered the ground beneath their feet. Ancient birch trees stood peacefully on either side, their white trunks glowing gently beneath the morning light. The air carried the comforting fragrance of cedar, wild mint, and fresh rain lingering from a night long since past. No railway remained visible now, only the winding path ahead. Lumen glanced back once. The cedar gate had already disappeared behind the silver mist. "It feels farther away." Mira smiled gently. "It isn't. The hidden library simply knows when a memory should become part of the heart instead of the eyes." Lumen nodded thoughtfully. "I think I'm beginning to understand." They continued walking. The forest itself seemed unusually peaceful. Birdsong floated softly through the branches. Tiny shafts of sunlight danced across the moss like scattered ribbons of gold. Occasionally, small woodland creatures paused to watch the travelers pass. A family of white rabbits rested beside a fallen log. Silver squirrels chased one another silently across high branches. Even the breeze seemed careful not to disturb the quiet rhythm surrounding the path. After some time, they reached a small clearing. At its center stood a weathered stone well, not grand, not magical in appearance, simply old. Its circular stones had been softened by countless seasons. Wild ivy climbed gently around its edges. A small wooden bucket rested neatly beside it. Elias stepped closer. The water inside reflected the bright morning sky with perfect clarity. No ripples, no drifting leaves, only stillness. Beside the well stood a modest wooden sign. Its carved lettering had faded with time, yet it remained perfectly readable. Asterisk, asterisk, every traveler may drink. Asterisk, 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 no traveler leaves thirsty. Asterisk, asterisk, Lumen smiled. I like this place already. Mirror rested one hand upon the cool stone. It reminds me of the station. Elias nodded. The same kindness, but quieter, as if hearing those words. A gentle voice drifted from somewhere beyond the clearing. Kindness usually becomes quieter the longer it has existed. The companions slowly turned. Walking calmly toward them came an elderly woman wearing a long forest green cloak embroidered with tiny silver leaves. Her silver hair was gathered loosely behind her shoulders. In one hand, she carried a woven basket filled with fresh herbs and wildflowers. In the other, a simple wooden walking staff, polished smooth by many years of gentle use. Her eyes held the same peaceful warmth Elias had begun recognizing throughout the hidden library. Not curiosity, recognition, as though she had quietly expected them all along. She stopped beside the old well and smiled. I was wondering when the station would finally send you. Elias returned the smile. You knew we were coming. She laughed softly. No, I simply kept preparing the tea. Lumen couldn't help laughing. You prepared tea without knowing whether anyone would arrive. The woman nodded as though the answer were perfectly obvious. The forest teaches patience. If no guests arrived today, the tea would still have been grateful for being made. Silence followed, not because no one wished to speak, but because somehow that answer already felt complete. The elderly woman gently placed her woven basket beside the old stone well. Fresh rosemary, wild chamomile, mint, lavender, tiny blue blossoms Elias had never seen before. Each herb carried the quiet fragrance of the surrounding forest. She carefully lifted the wooden bucket from beside the well. Without effort, she lowered it into the perfectly still water. There was no splash, only the soft whisper of rope gliding through ancient wood. When she drew the bucket upward once more, the water shimmered like polished crystal beneath the morning sun. She filled a simple iron kettle, then carried it toward a small stone hearth resting beneath the branches of an enormous birch tree. No fire waited there, only smooth river stones arranged in a perfect circle. The woman placed the kettle upon them. She smiled. Good morning. For a heartbeat, nothing happened then. The pale gray stones slowly began glowing with gentle amber warmth. Not flames, not sparks, only quiet heat, as though the earth itself had peacefully agreed to help. Lumen's eyes widened. You didn't light anything. The woman looked pleasantly surprised. Didn't I? She gently rested one hand upon the glowing stones. Warmth arrives in many ways. Mira smiled knowingly. The hidden library teaches that lesson often. It does. The woman began sorting the herbs with calm, practiced hands. She never hurried. Each leaf, each blossom, each tiny stem, everything received the same quiet attention. Elias watched carefully. You've prepared tea here for many years. The woman smiled without looking up. For longer than I remember counting. He thought of the unmoving hourglass, the listening benches, the clock garden, perhaps everyone within the hidden library. Eventually stopped measuring time in ordinary ways. Instead, they measured kindness, journeys, friendships, moments of quiet understanding. The kettle slowly began releasing delicate ribbons of steam. The fragrance spread almost immediately. Soft chamomile, wild honey, fresh rain, lavender warmed by sunlight. The forest itself seemed to breathe more deeply. Tiny birds gathered quietly among nearby branches. Even the white rabbits from the clearing wandered closer before peacefully settling beneath the birch trees. The elderly woman looked toward Elias. The forest always joins tea. Lumen laughed. It knows when it's ready. She nodded, just as travelers do. She poured the steaming tea into 4 beautifully handcrafted ceramic cups. No two matched. One carried tiny carved stars, another flowering vines. One displayed quiet rivers. The final cup remained beautifully plain. She offered that one to Elias. I think, she smiled warmly, this one has been waiting for you. Elias accepted it with both hands. The warmth spread gently through his fingers. He took one slow sip. The flavor felt strangely familiar, not because he had tasted it before, but because it somehow reminded him of peaceful mornings he had forgotten he still carried inside himself. The woman watched him kindly. The best tea, she whispered, never introduces you to something new. It gently helps you remember something beautiful that was already there. Silence settled once more beneath the birch trees. The kettle continued singing softly. The forest listened, and somewhere deeper among the peaceful woodland paths, another quiet invitation had already begun waiting. The warm tea lingered gently in their hands, long after the cups had begun to cool. no one hurried to finish. The forest seemed to understand that some conversations unfolded best between quiet sips rather than spoken words. The elderly woman carefully returned the kettle to the glowing stones. Immediately, their gentle amber warmth faded once more into ordinary river rock. Lumen watched with quiet fascination. They only stay warm while they're needed. The woman nodded. Everything in this forest rests when its work is complete. She looked thoughtfully toward the towering birch branches above. Even kindness. Elias tilted his head slightly. Kindness rests. She smiled. It should. Otherwise, people begin giving from exhaustion instead of love. Those words settled softly into the peaceful clearing. Mira lowered her cup. I've never thought of kindness that way. The woman gently brushed a fallen silver leaf from the table. The forest teaches balance. A tree never tries to bloom every day. It flowers. It rests. It grows. It lets go. And then, when the season quietly returns, it blooms once more. Elias found himself thinking about everyone he had met since entering the hidden library. Ferris, Leora, Rowan, the station keeper, the baker. None of them ever appeared hurried. None seemed burdened by endless responsibility. Perhaps they all understood when it was time to serve, and when it was time simply to rest. A peaceful breeze wandered through the clearing. One silver birch leaf drifted gently into Elias' empty teacup. Instead of floating, the tiny leaf slowly folded itself. Once, twice, again, until it became a perfectly formed little paper boat. Lumen leaned closer. It made itself. The woman laughed softly. No. The breeze remembered how. She lifted the tiny leaf boat carefully from the cup, then placed it into Elias' palm. It won't last forever. The leaf will eventually become part of the forest again. She looked kindly into his eyes. But perhaps its lesson will stay longer. Elias admired the delicate little boat. It weighed almost nothing, yet somehow it felt like another quiet promise. Not that beautiful things would last forever, but that beauty never truly disappeared. It simply learned how to become something new. The woman slowly gathered her empty cups before placing them back into her basket. She rinsed each one using fresh water from the old stone well, not because anyone expected perfect order, simply because caring for small things seemed to bring her quiet happiness. The companions watched without speaking. Even such an ordinary task felt peaceful here. The forest had a remarkable way of making simple moments feel complete. Far beyond the clearing, a single bell rang softly somewhere among the trees. Only once. The elderly woman's gentle smile widened. She looked toward the woodland path, stretching deeper into the forest. "It seems," she said quietly, "our next guest has arrived." No one asked who it might be. They simply listened as slow, unhurried footsteps began making their way through the silver birch woods toward the little clearing. The footsteps never hurried. They approached with the same quiet patience. The forest seemed to breathe into every living thing. Soft leaves stirred. Silver sunlight shimmered between the birch trunks. Then the visitor appeared. He was an elderly gentleman with neatly combed white hair and gentle gray eyes that reflected more curiosity than age. His long coat was woven from deep forest green wool, fastened with simple wooden buttons polished smooth by many years of use. Across one shoulder rested a weathered leather satchel, unlike most satchels Elias had seen. This one carried dozens of tiny embroidered patches. Each patch depicted a different flower. None repeated. The elderly woman smiled warmly. "I was wondering whether you'd hear the bell." The gentleman chuckled. "I've never ignored it." He removed his hat with quiet courtesy. "Good morning." His voice carried the same peaceful steadiness as the surrounding woods. No introductions seemed necessary, yet somehow everyone already felt acquainted. The woman gestured kindly toward the empty chair. "Our tea was waiting." The gentleman smiled. "Then I arrived exactly on time." Lumen laughed softly. "You didn't even ask what the bell meant." The old traveler settled comfortably into the chair. "The forest never rings unless someone is meant to share the morning." He accepted a freshly poured cup of tea with both hands. Only after taking one gentle sip did he finally look toward Elias. "So, you've come from the station." Elias nodded. "We left this morning." The gentleman smiled knowingly. "Then you've already learned something important." Elias tilted his head. "What do you think I've learned?" The gentleman looked toward the old stone well. "That rest isn't the opposite of the journey. It's part of the journey." Silence gently followed, not because anyone questioned the words, but because each quietly recognized their truth. The elderly woman smiled proudly. "I always enjoy hearing someone else explain the forest." The gentleman laughed. "The forest explains itself. We simply remember the words." He carefully opened his weathered satchel. Inside rested dozens of tiny cloth packets tied with colored thread. Lavender, ivory, silver, soft blue, each beautifully labeled in elegant handwriting. Lumen leaned forward curiously. "What are they?" The gentleman selected one silver packet. Seeds. Mira looked surprised. For planting. He smiled. For remembering. He untied the tiny ribbon. Inside rested several impossibly small silver seeds. Each shimmered softly like polished moonlight. They grow only once. They bloom only once. And they cannot be replanted. Elias gently studied the tiny seeds. What do they become? The gentleman closed the packet carefully. That depends. He smiled toward the peaceful forest. They become whatever kindness planted them. The morning breeze quietly carried another shower of silver birch leaves across the clearing. For a brief moment, the tiny leaves danced together through the sunlight before settling peacefully upon the moss below. The elderly woman looked toward the winding forest path ahead. The tea house is only the beginning. The gentleman nodded. Every forest has places waiting beyond the first welcome. Elias followed their gaze. The woodland path disappeared deeper between ancient birch trees, not hidden, simply patient, waiting quietly for travelers who had already learned not to rush toward beautiful things. For a long while, no one spoke. The tiny silver seeds rested safely inside the elderly gentleman's satchel. The tea had grown pleasantly warm instead of hot. The forest seemed quietly satisfied with the gentle company gathered beneath its ancient birch trees. At last, the gentleman carefully fastened the silver ribbon around the little packet once more. Not every traveler receives seeds. Lumen looked up curiously. Why not? The gentleman smiled. Because many still believe flowers grow for themselves. He rested the packet carefully back inside the satchel. These only bloom when planted for someone else. The words drifted softly into the clearing. Elias thought of every gift he now carried. The folded paper crane, the traveler's blossom, the brass blossom key, the white stone, the cedar bookmark, the silent railway whistle. Each had arrived because someone had chosen kindness without expecting anything in return. Perhaps that was how every meaningful journey quietly continued, not by keeping beautiful things, but by allowing them to become gifts for someone else. The elderly woman gathered the last of the empty cups into her woven basket. The gentleman rose slowly from his chair. He looked neither tired nor hurried, simply ready. He smiled warmly toward Elias. I believe the path has one more surprise before you leave the forest. Elias smiled back. You already know what it is. The gentleman laughed softly. Perhaps, but surprises lose their wings when someone catches them too early. Lumen grinned. Everyone in the hidden library says things like that. The elderly woman laughed with him. only because simple answers rarely stay in the heart. The little clearing slowly returned to its peaceful rhythm. The kettle rested quietly. The glowing stones had become ordinary river rocks once again. White rabbits wandered lazily through the wildflowers. Silver birds continued singing somewhere high among the birch branches. Nothing extraordinary remained. Yet somehow, everything felt quietly miraculous. Before the companions stepped back onto the woodland path, the elderly woman reached into her basket one final time. She removed 3 tiny cloth sachets tied with pale green ribbon. Each released the gentle fragrance of lavender, cedar, and wild mint. For your satchels, she handed one to Elias, one to Mira, one to Lumen. They won't make the road easier. They'll simply remind you that peace has a fragrance. Elias carefully tucked the little sachet beside his other keepsakes. The comforting scent immediately blended with the quiet warmth of everything he already carried. The elderly gentleman adjusted his weathered satchel. The embroidered flowers caught the morning sunlight for just a moment. Then he nodded toward the winding woodland trail. The forest has already opened the next page. No one asked what waited ahead. They had stopped asking such questions many journeys ago. Together, Elias, Mira, and Lumen stepped once more beneath the silver birch trees. Behind them, the little tea clearing slowly disappeared among flowers, sunlight, and birdsong. Ahead, the peaceful woodland path curved gently toward another unseen destination. And somewhere beyond the quiet forest, the hidden library was already preparing another gentle welcome for every heart willing to arrive slowly. As the quiet woodland path disappears gently beneath the silver birch trees, perhaps another traveler will one day pause beside the old forest well, share a peaceful cup of tea, or plant one small seed of kindness that quietly blossoms for someone else. And perhaps, somewhere beyond this story, one gentle act of kindness that begins with you may travel farther than you'll ever know. For now, allow the peaceful roads of the hidden library to grow quiet once more. Let the tea kettle rest. Let the silver birch leaves dance softly in the evening breeze. And let your own heart carry only the calm you need into the night ahead. If these quiet journeys have become a peaceful part of your evenings, your gentle support helps keep the lanterns glowing for every traveler who finds their way to the hidden library. Thank you for walking beside Elias once again. Sleep peacefully, dream gently, and whenever your heart is ready, the hidden library will be waiting to welcome you home.